Not a bad morning, is it?
Lovely morning.
That's Chris Bradley. This is his farm, which he's been farming all his life. And when he and Barbara retire, they're going to go off and live somewhere gorgeous, even warmer than Yorkshire. Well, that's the plan, anyway. But Chris has got unfinished business here. For years, this place has puzzled him. For a start, it's got a Saxon name. And look at this piece of stone. And what about that one? And then, in the 1960s, an archaeologist dug around here and came up with a couple of walls and a tiled floor. So what's going on here? There was obviously once a big and important building here. But what was it? We've got just 3 days to find out. Brimham, the site of Chris and Barbara's 150-acre farm, lies in a valley in North Yorkshire, close to Fountains Abbey. In the 1960s, a couple of trenches dug by Colin Platt revealed substantial stonework. There's no record of the archaeology, but we do have some photos of the dig taken by Chris's dad. Mick, you've got some evidence of the 1960s dig?
We have. We've got some photographs that survive of various trenches, look, with tiles in and bits of wall and other holes with other bits of wall in.
What kind of period do you reckon?
Well, I mean, it could be medieval, it could be post-medieval, but I mean, these look like medieval tiles, you know, laid as a floor, and there's a thing that looks like a plinth here.
Mark, do these tiles tell you anything?
They're exactly the sort of tiles that you'd expect to see at Fountains Abbey, which is only 6 miles or so that way.
And are they the sort of quality that you'd get at Fountains Abbey?
They are. They're absolutely the best sort of quality building materials you'd expect to see in the first part of the 16th century. It's good stuff.
It's not a bad start for day one, is it, Chris?
Very good.
Do you remember this dig?
Not a great deal, I was too young.
Do you remember where the trenches went in?
Oh, yeah. One was over there by that gate, and the other was down on that terrace there.
So we think we've got a good idea of where the trenches might have been, but we'll still geophys this area to work out exactly where to dig. But first things first, these big stones need to be recorded and then safely lifted out of the way. While we're doing this, our architectural expert Jonathan has an early look at them with Phil.
There's no obvious moulding on it, really. It's just, yeah. Ah.
Do you like that?
I like that a lot.
Right.
Ah.
So, again, why do you like that one a lot?
Well, look, we've got these two patches of mortar. There's one here, and then there's another one just there. I don't think that's a lintel. I think that's actually the sill. So those are the sills, and that's actually the window there, and the window there. You following me?
So basically, I'm in a room and I'm looking out through a window.
That's right, yes, and that's just the sill at the bottom of the window there. Unfortunately, it's not particularly diagnostic date-wise.
It's clear there'd been a substantial building around here. Colin Platt's two trenches from the 60s were in this area. One here and the second around here. Somewhere here, this wall was uncovered. Relocating that trench and wall is our first target.
Right then, let's get this trench in.
Oh! Bingo.
Hang on just a minute here.
Well, we hardly needed the digger for that. This stonework just under the topsoil could be the wall photographed in the 60s. It's a good start. In the field next door, though, Chris shows Mick something that's puzzling him.
The cows graze in this field.
Yeah.
And they've been scratching away at the ground here, look, and they've exposed this big wall.
Oh, crikey, yeah. It's a good metre across that, isn't it?
Good wall, yeah.
Well, the obvious thing is to put a trench round this and see what it is, if you're happy with that.
Oh, yeah, great.
OK.
But first, we'll geophys this field. There may be other stones beneath the surface, and we want to find out if this actually is a wall. But digging holes is simply half the story here. The buildings themselves are intriguing. When I first arrived here this morning, I thought there were just these two carved stones. And then Stuart discovered this one, this ripple effect, is actually one that's eroded. There's loads of graffiti, old-fashioned graffiti, dotted all over the place. What's going on?
Well, it looks like a sort of medieval inscription, doesn't it? And because it's on old blocks in different parts, it must have been off a structure that's been taken apart and the blocks have been reused.
Why is it here?
Well, it looks medieval. It looks like a sort of thing you'd get on the front of a monastery or something like that.
But it wouldn't be a monastery here, would it?
No, but it might have belonged to a monastery, and there might have been some posh building here.
Like what?
Abbot's house, retreat house, something like that. It looks like something like that. Or it might even have been a grange. It's a bit posh for a grange.
What is a grange?
Well, a farm that belongs to a monastery that produces the materials, the food that's used. They're often called granges.
Janet, do we know who owned this area during the medieval period?
Yes, we do. We know that Brimham was owned by Fountains Abbey.
Ah.
We've got a very interesting set of charters. What this tells us is that round about the middle of the 12th century, a very important nobleman in Yorkshire called Roger de Mowbray granted the monks of Fountains a fairly small, fairly modest amount of land, sometime before 1160. But Roger makes one important stipulation, and that is he reserves for himself in the wood of Brimham all right to hunting. All the wild animals, the stags and the wild boars and the wild birds and so on.
So the monks can do what they like, it's just that there'll be hunters tacking back and forth across the land.
That's right.
OK, we know that the monks of Fountains were here, but Mick was speculating that it might be a grange.
Yeah, well, it is within a few years.
Is it?
It is, yes. We've got a royal confirmation of Richard I, so dated between 1189 and 1199, in which Brimham is referred to as a grange. It's one of about 25 granges of Fountain.
But as far as our stones are concerned, I think what we need to do is to get a photograph or a drawing of each one and start to see if we can put the inscription back together and get them looked at to see what date the lettering is and all the rest of it. And it's going to be a lot later than the date you're talking about, I'm sure of that. But we should certainly get on with that and find out what it says.
It's the trouble with this kind of history. It all seems so early, but the more that you look at a lot of the finds, they tend to be later than you hoped, don't they?
Well, you remember this abbey's going on till 1539, something like that. It could happen right towards the end of it.
Yeah, this is just where it starts.
Yeah.
The fact that this farm was once a grange is very important. It ties our farm into the fortunes of Fountains Abbey, which is just 6 miles away. For 400 years, the abbey ruled the entire area. It had 25 granges, monastic farms which supplied it with all of its animals, produce and goods. Our site was just one of those. But knowing that there was a grange here is both good and bad news. Good news in that we now know that we're looking for medieval buildings. Bad news in that we don't know what those buildings might be. Are these things like monasteries in that they're so ruthlessly planned that if we find one corner, we can actually predict where all the other bits are going to be?
No, I mean, that's one of the problems. One of the problems is that, you can't say, yes, because we've got these bits of wall, that's where the church is, that's where the accommodation, which you can do basically with monasteries from about 1100 onwards, most of them.
I have to say, it sounds like we don't know all that much about them.
No, we don't really. There's very few of them been excavated, because they're tucked under, farms like this in many cases.
So the problem from our point of view is that even if we find a part of the grange, we may not know it's part of the grange.
No, and we might not know what sort of building it is, because it might be the corner of a barn, but you only see a little bit of it and you don't know it's a barn, or the corner of a cow house, something like that. And as you're implying, there's no plan to this, to say, oh, because we've got the barn, this is where the accommodation is, this is where the pigs were living. It's not like that. It's not predictable.
Right. So even if we find anything, we won't necessarily be able to tell what it is. There are no shortcuts here. We're also photographing all the medieval stonework. Maybe the words will give us a clue as to what sort of building they came from. But the Latin does suggest there may have been a church here. The whole farm is littered with medieval stone, and the more we look, the more we find. Even the field walls have got a story to tell.
It's all little bits scattered around. But here...
Wow, that's something.
It's a really nice piece. This is for very sad people who get excited by carved stone. What you've actually got to visualise is that this thing would be rotated round.
Can you turn it the other way up? Oh, yeah.
And that bit is actually like a little shelf for a statue to sit on. This is a string course.
Which is what?
What you've got to imagine is there's a wall sat on top of that, and there's a wall below it. And this is like a projecting little band that runs round the building.
Does that imply this was something of some size?
It does, because you tend to use a string course as a sort of architectural device to define different floor levels. So it does look as though we might have quite substantial buildings here with more than one floor.
I know this is only a first glance, but what's all this lot telling you so far?
Well, what's interesting is it's all of a period. It all seems to be late 15th, perhaps very early 16th century. So it looks as though it's either come from the same building or maybe a series of buildings that were all put up at the same time.
That field wall is here, away from our main site. Back in her trench, Rakshar's now beginning to think she's wasting her time.
What have you got then?
They're just big random blocks of masonry. There's one there and here, but they're not bonded or in any way. They're not in a structure. It's just like they've just dumped some masonry in here.
Yeah, well, that sort of really goes with that. There's no, come on, there's no wall lines there, are there? It's just a massive block of high readings. I can't see that straight wall that they dug in the 60s.
Well, the more that we dig down the side of this, the less convinced I am that it's a wall.
It seems that the 1960s dig got it wrong. This isn't a wall, it's just rubble. So we close this trench down and Phil opens another here. He's looking for the other 60s trench, where they appeared to unearth walls and a medieval floor. Next door, where the cows had uncovered stonework, the news is much better. We can confidently say that Matt has found a wall.
Matt, that looks absolutely fantastic.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got just below the grass, and you can see we've got this huge wall going across here.
Yeah. It looks a bit massive and good to just be a fill wall, isn't it?
Well, you'd need a good wide base to raise the wall up above.
Ah, right. Does this help at all?
Well, I don't think this wall goes any further in that direction. Look, you can just see it here in the results.
Yeah.
It doesn't extend beyond the trench much.
Right.
If it's a building, it might come this way a bit, to sort of this sort of distance.
So we might get a return across here, perhaps?
Yeah, but look at the wider picture. Look, this is where our wall is. What we appear to have, the red is high resistance. A sort of series of rectilinear responses.
Sort of going with that alignment
all
down
on the
field.
same alignment.
Right.
But look at this area here. High resistance is red again.
Yeah.
So that's over here by the tree. You can see the slight rise in the ground.
All right.
I think there might be another building here.
Right.
So I think the building might go this way, and then you've got...
Not down that way.
I mean, I'd like to test this.
OK.
I mean, if we put a trench across here, that would easily resolve what's going on.
Yeah.
John believes that whatever's happening in this field stops in this area. Mick agrees, and we decide to put a trench in here. Back in the other field, things are looking up.
This is the wall that Platt dug in the 60s, look.
After the disappointment of Rakshar's trench, Phil's been looking for other walls identified in the 60s.
Stonework, isn't it?
There it goes. It is so nice to actually find the edges of the trench, because I think we actually do have the edges of the trench.
The top layer look a lot more disturbed than the photographs.
It does, doesn't it? What do you reckon the cause of that then?
That's probably the heavier tractors and machinery going over the bridge.
Yeah, that's it. A bit of an anticlimax now, is it?
No, not at all.
It's good stuff. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's, I think it's just really good that we've actually been able to pin down one of Platt's trenches.
Yeah.
And now we can go on from here and really find out what it's all about.
Yeah. Do you want a job shoveling brown stuff in the winter?
We'll have to do it all year round, don't I?
Phil?
What?
Let me pull you a pint.
Well, it's the first time I've ever had a decent offer from you, Mick.
Well, I've never
What
pulled
the hell
one.
have you got on?
No, it tells you on the label, look.
Mick's Monk's Brew.
Yeah.
No codswallop. I could die of thirst waiting for you to pour this.
I'm learning.
It's short. Fill it up. That's better. Look at that.
You want to get that down you, mate. It's better than the muck you usually drink.
I'll see you about this later on, I tell you. Behind the bike shed.
I think I'd rather not, actually. It is chaos, isn't it?
No, it's not chaos, but we're trying to do 4 big things, really. We're trying to do a topographical survey, the documentary survey, the building survey, and dig some holes. It's a lot of work to do.
Is there a plan?
Yeah, there is a plan. I mean, the plan is to pursue all those courses and see where they lead us to.
And are we getting anywhere?
Well, we are. I mean, the excavation we've got outside the wall there is producing all sorts of interesting stuff. Look at these pieces of lead, for example. This is window cane stuff, you know, from medieval windows. This is roof material, so it's got a lead roof. And somebody's been melting lead down as well. And this is posh stuff. You know, this is the sort of thing you get off a decent residence, not just an ordinary cattle shed or something.
So what about tomorrow?
Well, it looks to me as if it's all coming this way. Our most interesting stuff is over the wall there.
Yeah.
And it's sort of indicating that we should come this way and look in this direction.
Does that imply what I think it implies?
I'm afraid it does, yeah.
Tomorrow we're going to trash someone's garden?
I'm not about trash it, we're going to have to dig in the garden here, I think. That's my feeling at the moment.
Oh, you've got to stay with us for that.
Yes!
It's the beginning of day 2. We're in Yorkshire looking for a monastic grange, a farm for monks. We found some walls, but we've got no idea what they are. Yesterday evening we agreed we'd put a trench in there. As you can see, absolutely nothing has happened whatsoever. We also said that we would put in one in the middle of this garden here, and there's no disturbance at all apart from a few dirty breakfast things. In fact, the only sign of any activity whatsoever is over here. What are you two doing?
Well, on that building there's a little sign that says danger of death, and there's a little matter of an 11,000 volt cable running right through where we want to dig.
And I ain't digging there.
I can understand that. But what about here in the garden?
Well, we haven't surveyed that yet.
Well, you know, I'm reasonably happy. I don't really want to dig it.
Why?
Well, look how pristine it is. It's just a beautiful garden. Would you want to dig that?
So you've landed up here?
Yeah, look. We've got these strong responses here, just below our feet. It's just possible there's a building here, so I think we should look at that while we're doing the garden.
Happy with that?
Well, you know, there's some really nice large bits of stone all around here.
Yeah.
My only problem is that in the garden it's a lot more lower, a lot more level, and we're on a very raised ground here, so we could just be looking at, like, build-up and a rubble deposit.
Yeah, but you won't know until you dig it.
Look like your anomaly.
Yeah. So you don't want to dig there, you don't want to dig there, and you're reluctant to dig here. Thank you, Bridge. What a great start to day 2. Well, like it or not, Bridge will open a trench over this geophysical anomaly. We've only got 2 other trenches open. Matt's, where he's trying to figure out what this substantial wall was once part of. And Phil's. He's been re-excavating a trench dug in the 1960s that included 2 massive walls and a medieval tiled floor. He's now desperate to extend his trench further to work out what's going on. But he'll have to wait for the all clear from GeoPhys. With an 11,000 volt cable running through this area, we can't be too careful. Bridge has already removed the topsoil and has hit important archaeology. These tiles, discovered just under the surface, seem to have the same pattern as those revealed in the 60s in the area Phil's now digging. Stuart's adapting to farm life pretty well, and he thinks the landscape tells a similar story.
Hi, mate.
What's this then? New form of transport?
That's a great way to see the landscape. Chris made me the offer, so I took it up. Well, you've got the height. You can actually see all the lumps and bumps really clearly, and it says making limbs as well, so it's great.
So you can see this thing here, can you? Which looks like a fish pond, except it's very odd, I think.
Well, yeah, it's a classic fish pond. It's beautiful.
Not like the ones I'm familiar with.
Isn't it?
No,
You're supposed to spend more time in Yorkshire. I mean, it's a lovely rectangular shape.
Yeah.
It's been cut across the contours. Can you see that dip coming around the corner there?
Yeah.
That's an old spring line. It comes down here, then they've cut the pond across it, so that the water can flow into it, and then down there's another channel where the old spring line used to go away.
So they've just been really opportunistic and tapped a spring and filled the water up from that?
You call it opportunistic, I call it thrifty. We're thrifty in Yorkshire. It's minimum amount of work, maximum amount of water.
Have you got any other things like this on the farm?
Yeah, mate, there's a couple in that field over there, and there's a couple over there as well.
Sounds as if you ought to go and have a look at these, Stu, and see what you think. Yeah, go and get in your chariot then. You're never going to get it off in there, you know.
This fish pond and the other one we found are very big. They suggest that farming fish was happening here on an industrial scale. And it was all down to this place, Fountains Abbey, which owned our site at Brimham for 400 years. The abbey itself dates from the 12th century. In the late 15th century, this tower was added by Abbot Hubie, who went on a building spree in the surrounding area. But did that building spree reach as far as the grange at Brimham?
When I first went to Brimham, you know, and saw those inscribed blocks with the lettering on, it reminded me of this tower with these inscriptions here.
Sure.
Was I right to think that?
Oh, absolutely. They're absolutely identical. The form of the lettering, the spacing, absolutely identical. So it could even be the same carver. It's that close.
So if Hubie's paying for this to be built, is it likely that he's probably paying for our place as well?
I think it's very likely. Yeah. What do you think, Mark?
That's certainly entirely consistent with the way we've understood the investment that the Abbey was making in its buildings, both here and on the outlying sites. So perfectly good sense to employ the same craftsmen on all those projects.
And do the other architectural details that we can see on this tower, do they help with what we've got at Brimham as well?
They certainly do, yes. I mean, if we look right at the top of the tower, we've got that three-light window. I mean, that's very similar to the kind of architectural fragments we've been bringing up at Brimham.
Yeah.
And then if we drop down a bit and maybe look at the buttress, which has got these niches in to take sculpture of some description.
Yeah.
Again, we've had very, very similar material at Brimham.
Inside the abbey, in the warming house, there's more evidence of a close link with our site. These tiles are exactly the same as those being lifted by Bridge in Herd Trench. It's probably now safe to say that Abbot Hubie did build at our site. The challenge for us is trying to establish just what his contribution to Brimham was. The community at Fountains was made up of monks who did all the religious work and hundreds of others known as lay brothers. And it's the lay brothers who would have been at our site doing all the farming work. What was a lay brother?
A lay brother was like a labourer. He worked for the monks. He did all the menial and manual tasks.
What would his day have been like?
It would have been hard work. Early start in the morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning. Get up, say his prayers, prepare the fires for cooking on, and then out into the fields, do all the menial tasks. And finish the day about 8 o'clock.
Matt?
Hello?
Have you been listening to all this?
Yeah, heard a few bits, menial tasks and the like.
Yeah, it's hard for us to empathise, really, isn't it, with quite how horrible their life must have been. Which is why you've been volunteered to live the life of a lay brother.
You're joking?
No, for the next 24 hours. Got to do what he tells you. What are you called?
I'm the novice master, so I'll be looking after you.
And that makes me, what, Brother Matt?
Lay brother.
Lay Brother Matt.
Yeah.
When do we start?
We can start right now.
Can I at least finish my hole?
No, we've got to start now.
Off you go. Over in the next field, Phil's made remarkable progress. He's now exposed both the walls that were found here in the 60s. The geophysics results for this area have produced a large anomaly just metres from Phil's trench. So Kerry and Ian have opened up a trench over it and hit these enormous pieces of stonework. Could they be part of the structure in Phil's trench? Phil?
Yo!
You're practically in Australia, aren't you?
I know, it's a lot warmer down here, it really is. But it is a cracking trench, and we're solving some of the problems.
But Jonathan, it is a zonking great wall, isn't it? This isn't some old barn.
Well, actually, you do find that even barns and other agricultural buildings are quite well made. So it could easily be a barn or even an industrial building. We know it's got to be of some scale because when you look at this chamfer, you can see it's actually returning here, and that's because on this corner there was a thumping great big buttress to hold the wall up. So we know we've got a very big building.
Now, you see, this wall here, we can say now, is definitely the same phase as this wall. We can tell that because the joints are actually bonded in together. You see, here the stone disappears behind there, but here the stone is disappearing in that way. So they are actually meshed in together. They're the same wall. But the thing of it is, this wall is not the same as this wall. They're on totally different alignments.
What, you mean they're going in different directions?
Yeah, this one comes straight across here, past here, and is in fact in the same alignment as that one there. And
hang on, look at hello, Professor Aston. What are you doing?
You come round and have a look.
All right, come on. It was nice to know that you were still working. Silently away, out of camera shot.
Cheeky devil. You see these two big blocks here?
Yeah.
They've just been standing on. I think that's part of that wall that's on top of the other wall through there. In other words, it's coming along through here and it's turning more or less under where the wall is now.
This is the top wall?
The top one.
Why? What do you think's going on?
Well, I'm wondering whether we haven't got a mill here, where the fill isn't in one part of the mill building. Because if you look back that way, you'll see the lump, the bank to the right of the tree.
Yeah.
I think that's probably one half of a dam, and the other half, you go across the stream, if you imagine that gap full of clay,
yeah,
then it's going to pond the water up behind, and you could then tap a channel off somewhere where all those branches and things are, bring it through here.
Coming past you.
By the time you get it to here, you're a good 2 to 3 metres above the stream. That would give you enough fall to drive a mill wheel, which would then power stuff back in the mill.
But why have we got two walls there at slightly different angles?
Well, presumably, I mean, like so many of these structures, they go through rebuildings, alterations, and we've got an earlier and a later phase.
How are we going to work this out?
Well, I think what we should do is probably clear about 2 to 3 metres each way here, just by taking the vegetation off, taking the loose stones out, and seeing what these walls do. Do they come through here? Have we got a channel? Have we got something like a wheel pit? And that'll answer it one way or the other.
All that's fine, but just one thing.
What's that?
We still haven't trashed Chris's garden.
Well, we might still go that way, because there's still a lot of stuff in that direction.
Good.
God, you're such a vandal.
A mill seems as good a suggestion as any, but can we prove it? And can we find a date?
Matter day. Ora pro nobis.
Our own lay brother Matt is now getting to grips with day-to-day life on a medieval monastic grange, and it's not easy.
Et in hora nostri... I'm sorry? Et in hora mortis nostri. In hora mortis nostri.
It wouldn't be too bad if it was just constant praying, but lay brothers also had to look after the animals and do all the other farm work as well.
Foot out. Stop it.
Back in the trench Matt had been digging, we started out with one wall. Raksha's been working on it in Matt's absence. She's extended it and now discovered other big chunky bits of stonework.
How have you got on then, Raksha?
Well, we opened this trench to see if we could actually get this wall coming in through here and see if we could get the return of the other side of the building. We managed to pick up these two whacking great big stones, and I do actually think that this is the corner.
Right, you don't think it's the base of a field wall going this way?
Ah, no, because if you come over here, Mick, if you look in the corner over there, there's huge stones on the corner.
The rest of it's very impressive, isn't it? Very impressive walling.
The problem is, we still have no idea what it is or what date it might be. We don't have any finds at all. Lay brothers lived a frugal life, and a hard one. There were over 400 of them at Fountains Abbey, and they had to carry everything by hand to and from the various granges. Our grange is 6 miles from the Abbey. The trench we opened to look for evidence of a mill is causing concern now. There's a bit of head-scratching going on.
That's not really quite what I expected, Jonathan. You've got 2 big blocks of stone, but it's not very good quality stuff, is it?
No, it doesn't compare to what we've had on the other side. I'm just wondering if that's a thickening of that wall. They've just built it up with rubble.
Yeah, it doesn't look like the end of that building, but they might be reinforcing that bank, mightn't they?
Exactly, yeah.
It also isn't quite what I expected if there was a mill leat coming in, bringing water to a wheel. I'd expected something rather more even than that.
Well, yes, I can appreciate that.
Perhaps if we took another bucketful out there, do you think?
Yeah.
Nunc et in hora mortis nostrae.
By this stage, Matt's really praying for a break.
Amen. OK. You're getting better.
Because it wasn't just the constant praying, the animals and the farm work. The Lay brothers had to do all the repairs around the grange too. All afternoon there's been a lot of debate behind the scenes about the structure in Phil's trench. Is it a mill, a large domestic building or a particularly impressive barn? I'd just like an answer. So have we sorted out this mill yet?
No, we haven't. We can't see a channel or anything there yet. We need to do a bit more work down there.
Hang on, so are you saying it might not be a mill?
Well, it may not be. We need to do a bit more work clearing up to see whether it is or not.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mick. I'm really sceptical about whether or not it is actually a mill. You know, we're trying really hard to look for a mill that's not quite coming. And I'm really concerned that we don't lose sight of the fact that what we know we must have here is a building of manorial status. You've got this lovely masonry that would fit that bill very nicely. Let's not turn it into a mill when it's really a manor house.
But I think the geophysics may help. We've got Phil's 2 walls here, and it's just possible we've got a return at this point. So if we drag a trench back and see if we've got a wall below our feet, then that will give us the size of the room.
OK, it gives us the size, but is that going to help us to decide exactly what it is?
Well, hopefully what we'll see is the position of doors and window openings, those kind of features, and that'll give us some insight as to the kind of function we're looking at for the building.
What about date? What date could it be?
Well, currently it could be anything between 1200 and 1600. But I think we've got a solution, because if we can get a better look at that plinth and its profile, that'll give us a date.
How come?
Oh, you get particular plinths at particular periods, basically, so that should pin it down.
So all afternoon we thought we had a water mill, and it looks like we may not have one. Maybe we've got a manor house, it's an ecclesiastical site, maybe it's a chapel. And what about dates? 1200, 1400, 1600, take your pick. We'll find out tomorrow.
Tertia di resurrexit am mortius, ascendit ad celios, sedet ad dextarum, di Patris omnipotentis. Amen.
It's the beginning of day 3 and I have a very important piece of paper in my hand. This is the geophys of this area here, and because of the big blob in the middle of it, we're going to have to dig. You don't mind if I butcher your, if I can reach it, tree, do you?
We'll cope with that.
Oh, right, and as soon as I've finished... Can you reach that one? As soon as I've finished doing that, then we're going to put a test pit, sorry about the apples, put a test pit in here because of the big blob. I've seen how they do this on the telly.
Have you?
Yeah,
That's all right,
then. Panic.
At least
How long have you
somebody
had this this particular lawn down?
Longer than I've been here anyway, but I'm feeling that's not going to last.
No, I don't think so.
Is that the best you can do?
Don't take the mick, just watch and learn, mate. You pick up a few tips. There's a good reason for digging in the garden. This blob in the geophysics suggests something substantial. So, despite my valiant efforts, I leave it to Bridge to get on with it. We've got 3 trenches open and they aren't yet giving us the answers we need. In her trench, Rakshar's got a large square stone building. We don't have a date and don't know what it is. Kerry's uncovered these large pieces of stone, which by themselves don't tell us very much, except they must have come from a large building.
And the other interesting thing is that these 3 stones here are still mortared together, so it doesn't look like it's demolition and it doesn't look like it's been carted here.
Yeah, we've got a huge, great lump of articulated masonry here, haven't we? It doesn't feel like demolition rubble. Because I can't even imagine if you're trying to demolish a building, you just try and, take down an elevation like that. You try and knock the stone off and reuse it on something else.
And then there's Phil's trench. Yesterday we found these 2 stone walls. They exactly match what was found here in the 60s. This is undoubtedly substantial, built to impress and definitely medieval. We just can't agree what it is. Theories include a mill, a barn, or even a manor house. But what would a manor house have to do with a monastic site?
In 1200, you'd have a situation which is the conventional way we'd look at these. Armies of lay brothers, you know, being organised by bailiffs and stewards and so on, doing the field work. By 1400 and 1500, that situation has had to change.
Why? What happened then?
Well, then you get something like between half and a third of the population dying off, killed off by the Black Death. And it either changes by leasing the land out. And when you lease it out, whether or not it's a formal manorial structure, certainly the lessee is going to think of himself like that. If he's got a farm in a nice place and he decides what's going to happen here, he's going to think, well, I'm pretty well lord of the manor here. Or you could have the situation where they've got to couch it in those terms just to have a legal explanation for what the status of the place is.
So even though the place is still actually owned by the church, the people who are living there think of themselves as a new class of landowners,
That's right.
a bit flash with their new houses.
That's right.
So maybe we shouldn't be thinking of it as a manor house at all, just like a posh house.
Yeah, it's really the big house, you know, the posh house in the area. That's how we should think of it.
Down by the stream, there's now no evidence of any structure. No one's thinking mill any longer. The plinth, though, has now been revealed, and we've got a date.
Well, you got your plinth, Jonathan. Does that help at all?
Well, I think it does. I mean, we've got this lovely shampoo, which we saw earlier on, and it comes down, and it just drops off onto this squared bit.
Yeah.
And then they've got this beautiful block in the corner, which is carved to resolve that squared off piece going into the other chamfer on this bit of the projecting building.
So that's actually quite a complicated stone to carve, isn't it, to get round that corner like that?
Oh, it is. It's a bit of an unusual way of trying to reconcile these two bits of structure.
Does that help you with date at all?
Well, I think it starts to push things back a little bit, and perhaps we're looking at the late 14th century, yeah.
So we're into the 1300s rather than 100 years later now?
Yeah, I think so.
If we're talking about grange buildings, this is in a different league to that, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, this is a huge, great big domestic building.
The plinth at last gives us a function and a date. This is a house, and it's early. One thing puzzles Phil, though. There seems to be a square bit on the corner. We have a few thoughts.
Sticking out. You've got solid wall there, you've got solid wall there, and right at the intersection, you've got a hollow.
Yeah.
Well, hang on, weren't you thinking of this as a staircase, or...?
That's right. Well, we had two options, didn't we? We had a staircase, or we had a guardrabe, or bog, really.
Loose, yeah.
Yeah. But looking at that straight edge, I think we've got to go for a bog, the bog option.
So where Phil is now is actually standing in the loo, in fact?
I think perhaps we've got a couple of shafts in here, which are taking the waste tone from the actual guardrabe proper, which is up there somewhere.
Ah, so one of these could come from a seat somewhere up here, and the other one's down this level.
And they'd be separated by a mid-spine wall, presumably, to keep them apart.
I'm happy with thinking this is a guardrabe.
Right.
And I'm standing in it.
Exactly.
Story of my life, isn't it?
It looks like it, Phil.
The toilet block would probably have been something like this. Toilets at different levels, with the waste working its way down to the base. On a more spiritual level, our own volunteer lay brother Matt has just about reached the end of his tether. Matt, your time's up.
Thank you.
Look at this. Can you see that? His back is actually red raw. Is it hurting?
It is starting to sting a little, yeah.
I'm surprised. How long have you been doing that?
Too long, too long. Thank God you saved me.
I certainly did. Well, come outside. You've got your rewards on this earth. Sit yourself down. We've got you a cup of tea.
Home comforts.
And your little reward.
Thank you very much. Look at that.
So, how was it? What was it like?
To be a lay monk, you basically have to be like a Shire horse. You're lugging stuff around the whole time. It's really, really hard physical work. And the grain lugging was really difficult. The dry stone walling really made my arms hurt. Some of it was okay though, some of it was quite nice in fact.
Well, what did you like?
I quite enjoyed milking goats actually. I've never done that before. Yeah, and going and collecting firewood and generally being outside. It's pleasant.
And what about waking up in the middle of the night? How did you cope with that?
Well, I've been up now for God knows how long. That was probably one of the worst things about being a monk, because I mean, you get up 3 hours before it's even light, and so you've got the whole day to do all this hard physical work, but you're still getting up before you can really do anything.
Was it a religious experience at all?
I certainly feel enlightened in some way. Whether it's just incredible tiredness and too much flagellation, I'm not sure.
What was your boss like?
Him up there was okay. He was a bit of a pain.
Eat your cake. The archaeology is at last giving us answers, and not all of them positive. In my trench in the garden, all we got was some rubble that had been dumped there, so we record it and shut it down. And in Bridges' original trench, the one just outside the garden, the story was the same, despite the tiles. More rubble. But it's a different story across in Rakshaw's trench, where Mark now thinks he knows what's going on.
We think with a wall of this substantial nature, it's to take considerable height above it.
Yeah.
And if you think about this as a square structure, how does the idea of a dovecote grab you?
Oh, that sounds very reasonable, actually, because we've got no doorway or anything, have we?
There's no doorway, although we've got some paving now around the outside.
Yeah.
No sign at all of a door.
I mean, often the door's a little way up the wall, isn't it? So you just sort of get in and help yourself to the birds and the eggs.
The other thing, of course, is that in a dovecote you don't get lots of domestic rubbish knocking about.
No fines at all to speak of.
And no fines at all to speak of is pretty much what we've got in this trench. So that fits pretty nicely.
So we've no way of dating this, but at least it's good to know what it was. When you see all this stuff, the filming and the recording and the heavy metal and all these trenches, it looks like getting towards the end of day 3 on every other time team, and we're just in the process of winding up and pulling all the information together. But there's one big difference this time. It's this. It's these buildings and it's what's underneath our feet, because most of the archaeology is here, and so we've got to use other methods to tell that part of the story. We know that these buildings all went up once the earlier medieval buildings were demolished, but there's still a lot to learn from them. Chris and Barbara are on a whirlwind tour of their own farm to find out more.
I'm sure you're intimate with this this doorway.
Yes.
The actual stonework is a complete medieval window.
A window?
When this barn went up, there were complete medieval buildings dotted around on the site where they could just pull this stuff out in its entirety. Those are corbels, stones which are designed to support beams, and they actually look like medieval. You've probably got a medieval cellar, and that when they rebuilt the house in the early 18th century, they just kept the cellar. It's the cellar to a substantial medieval building that's orientated this way, and then heading up towards we've got these two extant post-medieval buildings. That is a string course. A band of stone that runs around the building and it sort of defines the next level.
So it's definitely a two-storey building.
It's a two-storey building and it's a very big one as well. Do you see that blocked doorway at first floor level there?
Yeah.
Well, we think that linked in with the medieval building when it still existed. I think that is just a dressed piece of stone.
Quite dull by today's standards.
It is. I think we're really looking at a date which is possibly in the late 16th century. Late 16th century for this.
16th century?
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's a lot earlier than we've been led to believe.
Really?
Yeah. And still in use today.
Still in use today.
And then there's all that fancy stone with the writing on it. Unfortunately, much of the lettering was too fragmented or just too worn down to make sense of what it said. But we now have no doubt it would have come from a religious building, probably a chapel. But where was it? Well, the stone inventory in the field walls has thrown up an interesting pattern. Most of it came from this area. So we did some geophysics right at the end of day 3, and the results were tantalising.
Clearly there's a lot of stone built up on the bank, but this has to be something different. It's on the right alignment, it's east-west. It's 10 metres beyond the field boundary. I mean, I'd put some money on that.
Might there have been a chapel in this area here? Sometimes you pray for a day 4. Phil?
Yeah?
We've come to have a look at what you're doing.
Wow, you will not be disappointed. Come and have a look at this.
Oh,
Isn't
crikey,
it?
look at that.
Gorgeous floor, eh?
Fantastic.
But we're actually beginning to get an idea now of what the site is all about. You know, we had so much trouble finding whether this was a wall or not. We've now got it continuing right over towards the digger, so it definitely runs that way.
And it's massive, isn't it?
It is absolutely massive. But you see, on the corner, we've got a wall coming across there. It then returns round there. So what we've got on the corner here is either a turret or perhaps a toilet tower. Well, you know, they had to go somewhere, didn't they? You know,
right by the stream, isn't it? It's right by the stream.
Mind you, posh floor for a lav.
Well, exactly. Of course, these tiles are original, but they've actually been relayed. You can see that the pattern doesn't actually marry up. But you can see, I mean, somebody obviously thought, well, there's some nice tiles, we'll have them, and you can't blame them.
Hang on, Phil. If you're saying that this wall goes all the way back, well, to here at least.
At least.
Yeah.
And could be much bigger. Well, Mick, we're talking about a heck of a size for a building.
Yeah, and very posh with this plinth along the front.
So are we talking about a manor house or a posh residence?
Well, let's stick with a posh residence. And if the abbot's going to come and live here, and he's got a nice big building looking down the valley with either a little turret in the corner or a loo in the corner, that strikes me as really high quality accommodation, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Of course, it could extend under your house.
Yeah, it could easily.
yeah.
I don't think I like the sound of that.
House has got to go.
Yeah. This building certainly would have been very impressive, bigger than anything we expected. It had 2 ranges out the back and was huge. In terms of size, there is one good comparative site. This is what it may have looked like. King's Manor in nearby York. It really is huge. Look at that lawn, Barbara. You'd hardly know we've been here, would you? Just one slight downside, this huge hole here, but I'm afraid that's what happens when you get a 600-year-old abbot's house discovered in your paddock. How do you feel about that?
I think it's fantastic. I had no idea the structure was so substantial. It's far bigger than we ever imagined. Far bigger. It's brilliant.
We also imagined a simple story of there being a chapel with a few Lay Brothers houses, and that would be it. It's a bit more complicated than that.
The story of Chris and Barbara's farm certainly is complicated. For 400 years, the monks of Fountains Abbey ran it as a farm, a grange. In the 1300s, they built a huge house and rented it out as a manor house. In the late 1400s, it's likely to have come back to the abbey for the use of Abbot Hubie. In the 1600s, Chris and Barbara's current buildings began to spring up as the older medieval buildings were knocked down. Their buildings bear the signs of the upheaval from 500 years ago when the monasteries were dissolved. And today, everyday farming just carries on, much as it did then.